Today, I am going to be talking about the topic of pregnancy loss because this is something that has had a huge impact on my life. And, going into creating and starting a family, never in my wildest dreams did I think, like, oh, I'm going to struggle or I'm going to have a hard time or this isn't going to be easy for me, especially because getting pregnant with my first son, West, was so easy for me. But the reality is that going into trying to conceive Enzo, my second baby, we made a lot of changes. I cut out things like caffeine and alcohol because it was taking a lot longer than I would have thought. And then this time, I shifted so many things about my life. I cut out my private coaching practice for a while. I completely tried to reduce any forms of stress because what we know now is that stress can have a huge impact on your fertility and your egg quality, on hormonal conditions, on your capacity to conceive, but also can cause things like premature labor if you are further on. And when I look back on my pregnancy with Enzo, a big part of the reason that I went into labor early is because my blood pressure was really high because I was stressed. And so I want to talk to you guys about pregnancy loss because I think that this is something that so many women struggle with silently and alone. And you really shouldn't have to feel that way. And it takes somebody who's willing to be vulnerable and open about it to make you feel less alone. And that's what I want to be, as a voice and an advocate for women who are feeling that way. And so I think what a lot of women don't know is that the minimum of women or of pregnancies that end in loss is 20% or 1 in 5. Now, they think that the number is actually a lot higher than this because a lot of women actually don't even know they're pregnant when they've had a loss. They're like 5, maybe 6 weeks. They haven't even taken a test yet. They don't realize. And then they think, oh, I'm just getting my period. When the reality is they're either having a biochemical pregnancy where the embryo did not fully implant, or they are having a full-blown miscarriage. That's just a really early loss. Now, when we think about miscarriage, about 80% of miscarriages happen in weeks 4 to 12. So within that first trimester range. After that, the risk really, really goes down, which is good news. Now, if you are somebody who is between, before 35, between the ages of like 20 and 35 or however old, younger than 35, your chances for miscarriage are actually lower, which is, again, what I thought. I have been planning my family and thought I'm within the range. I'm not even considered a geriatric pregnancy yet. And that was just not the cards that I was dealt. But for the most part, the risk is between about 10 to 20% when you are in that age group. Then when you're 35 to 45, your risk starts to go up. So your risk becomes higher where you're now in that, 25% range of potential miscarriage. And then once you're above 45, your risk goes up even more. Most of this is because of the fact that egg quality starts to decline after age 35. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about my personal experience, because I think that what we want to remember when you are going through a pregnancy loss is that for so many people, for everyone, it's the reason why you have the pregnancy loss is going to be different. It's unique to you and your partner. And so for me, both losses were completely unique in why they happened. And it is a variety of physical, mental, emotional components that go into the workup of why this happened, right? And a lot of times you won't even know, but for me, we knew that in my first pregnancy, I had what was called a subchorionic hematoma, which is a blood clot between the wall of the uterus and the gestational sac, and gets in the way of blood supply to the baby. And when we had the blood clot come out, I was like, went to the doctor, baby still had a heartbeat, everything was fine. And then 2 weeks later, the baby didn't have a heartbeat anymore. And so the thought was from our doctors that the baby was normal. It was just the blood clot that caused the issue. A second time, when we were pregnant at the beginning of this pregnancy with twins. We were pregnant with twins, but one of the twins from the get-go was much smaller and in a much smaller sac than the baby that we're still pregnant with right now. And our doctor had warned us, this could be because of a chromosomal abnormality, a genetic abnormality. Usually we don't see these twins the smaller twin make it all the way to full term. And while we absolutely had our hopes up and it was a heartbreaking loss, we did have a warning that something seemed kind of off from the beginning. And so, at least for me, knowing these things, and for some of my clients who know, hey, I have PCOS, I'm not ovulating regularly, or hey, I have endometriosis and that causes inflammation and that can impact whether or not the baby has the capacity to implant, or the embryo, I should say, has the capacity to implant. Or I have low levels of AMH, meaning my egg quality is not necessarily the greatest. When you have these sort of answers, it makes it so much easier to start to then implement the proper strategies that are going to work for you. Because I'm not going to tell somebody with low egg quality to, take the same supplements as I would tell somebody who has PCOS. It's a completely different protocol and a completely different approach, because you want to use the things that are targeted solutions for whatever it is that you're dealing with as to why you can't conceive. And so that's why, for me, getting the lab testing done, understanding why these things happened was so important for me. After I had the time and the space to grieve the loss, to grieve the disappointment, to understand that these things happen and it's not my fault and there's nothing that I could have done differently that would have made that baby specifically survive. Now, there are things that I did differently to be able to boost my chances of creating a healthy embryo and creating a healthy pregnancy from the get-go, right? And so that was when I decided to take things into my control and to really say, what do I have the ability to focus on and change? And from that mindset being like, I can't control the timeline. I can't control when it happens. I can't control if it happens this month, but what I can control are things like my diet, my levels of stress, my movement, my lean muscle mass, the supplements that I'm taking, knowing all of the things that I am working on. For me, my hormones, my labs, things were pretty normal. So I really just focused on a holistic approach as to how I could make my eggs the best quality, make sure that my stress was low, make sure inflammation levels in my body were low, and that I had the best odds in my favor. But like I said, you want a targeted approach to you, which is exactly what I'm going to be teaching in our fertility Pathway to Pregnancy course, which is April 29th at noon. And we are going to be going through all of these things. So the different causes of issues with trying to conceive, whether you're dealing with a hormonal imbalance like PCOS, like endometriosis, you're dealing with fragile eggs, or you're dealing with some more anatomical structural issues like blocked tubes or fibroids or polyps. Or is it just that you're chronically stressed? Do you have hypothyroid? We're going to go through all of those different types of potential causes and potential issues with fertility. And then we're going to talk about the targeted solution. What are the superfoods that you should be eating? What should your plate nutritionally look like? What are things you want to actually take out of your diet? So like I mentioned, when we were trying to get pregnant with Enzo, actually have not really drank, except for my mom's 60th birthday, at all since we were trying to get pregnant with Enzo like 3 years ago. Because I just knew that it wasn't the greatest for my hormones and fertility. I really lightened up on my caffeine intake, really lightened up this time on my sugar intake and any sort of processed food that I was eating. And I like to look at it as discipline being a form of self-love to get you the results that you want to get, to have this intense focus on exactly what you want. That doesn't mean you're never going to have balance in your life again. It just means you're in the midst of a wave of life where you're really focused on what you want. And that means being a little bit more, rule-based and understanding what's going to get you there the fastest. So nutrition is really important. Movement is really important for the sake of your circulation, getting blood flowing to the reproductive system, but not doing movement that is going to be something that overly stresses your body, because as I mentioned, stress can lead to all of these different hormonal conditions and cause unnecessary oxidative stress that's going to then reduce your chances. So we'll talk about what's the right amount of movement. How can you manage your stress? What are the techniques that I personally used and that you can implement into your life to manage stress? How I started to navigate those feelings of disappointment and grief, because I'm not gonna lie, like, you know, after the loss, thinking like, oh, we'll get pregnant the next month. And then it wasn't like that. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't that easy. And having feelings of disappointment are okay, but I'm going to teach you how to continue to have hope and faith and maintain those feelings as you try, because your mental health is so critical during this time when you're trying to conceive. And then from there, we'll also talk about things like supplements and how to start to really focus your lifestyle, whether that is with your cleaning supplies, makeup, shower products, all these different things that you're using day to day to be pregnancy and trying to conceive safe. So if you want to join us for this workshop that is on April 29th at noon, you can save your seat with the link below, and we will see you there.